I don't know. The whole thing fills me with ambiguity, to be honest. Tremendous ambiguity in my own mind as to whether it was justified in the time, And yet at the same time I feel that the refusal of the British to actually deal with the reality of the desire for home rule, and particularly the Curragh Mutiny, which I think was a total negation of everything British democracy is meant to stand for. The fact that they got away with that, in my mind, to some extent, justifies what the rebels did in 1916, because if you could have such a powerful organ of the British establishment just ride roughshod over the democratic wishes of their own parliament, then what hope was there for anyone? At the same time, I'm always struck by what I think of as the absolute blindness of the 1916 leaders as to the reality of Northern Ireland unionism. And it's just extraordinary the way they just seem to think that they would be able to go ahead and do that. And in fact, interestingly, I attended the Titanic exhibition in Belfast recently, and it has a lot of history about the industrial nature of Belfast at the time and how powerful an industrial base it was. And when you consider the reality of Belfast at that time and that industrial base, and you compare it to the genteel poverty, in fact not even the awful poverty of Dublin, the fact that the 1916 people just didn't seem to want to deal with that. I mean, why would anyone in the north, anyone of a unionist sympathy at all, who was in this tremendously strong industrial base, why they'd want to join a nationalist Ireland? And the fact that the 1916 people never even thought about that, still, this type of ambiguity leaves me always thinking, well, I don't know. But yet, on the other hand, it's clearly our founding myth. And that ambiguity, I just hope this year we'll begin to deal with that ambiguity, because also that ambiguity, to my mind, continually gives some justification to the IRA and its various guises. Well, interestingly enough, I think we're doing it better now than we did in 1966. In 1966, I took part in the military parade. I was in the FCA at the time, and there was a very big event, a very big military parade, and this year I think it'll not be a military parade. There will be a military parade, but there's also going to be a civilian element, which is great. If you think about 1966, purely military, and there was no, certainly there were no civic groups in it that I recall. Certainly the idea of women being celebrated in their role in the Rising, which is something that's been underplayed for so long. Just the idea of that in 1916, it was right up there with the very idea that men could go to the moon. It wasn't going to happen, but things change, as we see. The thing was very different to this commemoration. This commemoration is kind of, to my mind, trying to examine the context of it, trying to examine what it actually meant, and trying to grapple with where it has left us now, both north and south. And the very fact that we're now talking about the Somme. For example, in 1966, the idea that anyone would have, gone into a situation where we begin to remember the men who were killed on the Somme and in Gallipoli and in the Irish regiments, and the realisation, which is beginning to be dealt with now, that many of the British troops who fought in Dublin were actually the Irish regiments of the British Army and had joined the British Army because they were Irish volunteers. We just didn't deal with that. And of course, the history we taught in school, really painted Pearse as if he was some sort of demigod. I went to a Christian Brothers school, 6th Street, and we had the history books we had, and they produced a kind of a comic about 1916, probably coming up to 1966. But it really did present it as a kind of a Catholic religious experience, which was awful, really, when you think about it, because it's excluded so many people. And if I look back now, I read recently saw that programme on television about, I forget the man's name, he was Barry Fitzgerald's brother. He took part in the 1916 rebellion, even though he was from the Church of Ireland, and he took part in it as a member of the Citizen Army, trying to fight for a better republic. And after 1916, he went to Frangach, and in Frangach, the Catholic nationalist element, saying the rosary as a kind of a military thing, that whole nationalist Catholic thing of 1916 so turned him off that he took no part whatsoever afterwards in the in anything to do with Irish independence. And I've great sympathy for that. I think, in a sense, when we look back, in a way, he's a real hero, because he went out and fought for what I believe in, a non-religious, pluralist society with justice for people. And it wasn't there. And I mean, it's interesting as well, when you look back on 1966, we examined none of that. And the way the whole thing panned out through 1919, and then ending up with the most conservative revolution in the world, from what had actually been a very revolutionary rebellion in its sense of Connolly, and a socialist rebellion, which in European terms was, quite extraordinary. And the amount of women involved, which again, in terms of the time, was quite extraordinary, all that was just wiped out, forgotten. It formed no part of the public memory, and it only does so now. So this is quite different, and hopefully at the end of the year we'll all have matured a bit and been able to reflect on both the bad and the good of what happened. Because certainly in 1966, nobody thought about the bad.